this is, a networking workshop where we're going to cover some of the good advice in terms of networking that is going to be applicable to everyone. I do not want to exclude the extroverts in the room. They are the ones that make the world turn in terms of the social engagements. But I do want to focus on this idea that people with introverted tendencies can sometimes have a harder time seeing networking as a positive, beneficial thing to do as part of their career progression, their career development. And it really is fundamentally an important thing to be integrating into every aspect of your professional and career development. And so finding ways to make sure that you are engaging from a networking perspective and are able to leverage the great resources and information that comes from networking is critically important. But you have to do so in a way that really aligns with your own personal strengths. And introverts do actually have lots of strengths when it comes to networking that are sort of perhaps undervalued or under talked about when we think about this. And so we're gonna touch on the difference between sort of people with introverted tendencies and extroverted tendencies. I'm not going to go into lots of theory about it. I'm just going to cover it in general terms. But hopefully this whole session will help you figure out the best strategy that you can use to be effective. Who am I? I am Dr. Joseph Barber. I am one of the team leads here at Penn Career Services. I work with graduate students and postdocs. My team does that too. So this is a session that is primarily focused on graduate students and postdocs. Welcome if you are not one of those populations. We're happy to have you here. But I've tried to make this sort of relevant to you as part of your career development as well. I am someone who has introverted tendencies. And so I'm going to draw on my own experiences as we talk about these elements. Today, we're going to sort of try to give you some confidence in terms of seeing networking as a really positive thing to do, not just a thing that you have to do because people tell you that you should be doing it, but something that you want to be able to integrate into your career exploration or job search process. If you were part of the sessions yesterday, we talked about career exploration and networking be a component of this. We're going to sort of look at networking as a more independent approach today, but some strategies that you can use, some ideas about how you can leverage your own introverted tendencies to be effective, and obviously encouragement to try, because at the end of the day, you really just have to be able to do it and practice doing it and feel confident gaining satisfaction that you've achieved your networking goals. And that's going to be a big part of this is, what are networking goals and how do you know when you've achieved them? So we're going to talk a little bit about the feelings around networking because they are important. They are one of the reasons that people do it because they feel positive about it or avoid it because they feel negative about it. So we can talk about those a bit. As I said, I'm going to talk about the differences between introverted and extroverted tendencies that people bring to the equation. And then we're going to run through some of the true benefits of networking so that hopefully you can see the value in terms of being able to do that as well. So let's start off with the truth here, that networking is definitely one of the most scary things that you could possibly do in the entire world, except that, there are scarier things out there. Sharks, I feel like, can be scary. They're going to eat you. Clowns, they're terrifying. Most of situations that you find them in, jumping out of planes is scary. Cats, they can be scary because sometimes they pet you. You can pet them. Sometimes they eat you. There's a sort of ambivalence there. Lego's scary because you tread on it. It's the most painful thing in the world, but yet you can still build with it. And then even before the pandemic, public transportation was terrifying, and now it's even more terrifying. So these are obviously scarier than networking. And if we look at and plot these on quadrants of terror versus danger, what we can actually see here is that networking doesn't actually fall into the terror category, the high terror or the high danger category. It is a fairly okay experience to have, right? At its heart, it's not actually that scary. And I think that people with introverted tendencies don't necessarily find networking to be scary, but what they find it to be is energy draining. And you think about doing networking, it's not something that fills you with energy. Like, I want to do this. It's not something that you are motivated to do. It's something that you have to get motivated in order to do, right? And that's a sort of a roadblock, an obstacle to sort of really engaging in this process, is that level of energy that you bring to the equation. So let's think about that as well, right? So this pre-pandemic was a standard stock image that you'd find for networking. And if, like me, you see this and this does not bring you joy, right? You see this and you say, I don't want to be in this scenario. What I see here is people talking to each other and seeing like they're having a really great time. But I know if I were in that room that I would not necessarily be talking to people, or I would have a hard time, engaging in that way. I'd feel out of place. I'd feel awkward. I'd feel isolated in a crowd. It's one of the elements from the article that I shared earlier on. I would also want to know, why am I here, right? Why am I in this room? What is my purpose here? Am I trying to do something? Because just chatting with people in a broad environment like this isn't going to fill me with joy. I'm going to feel lost. I don't have a strategy to sort of navigate through this. I don't know how to begin or how to end my strategy, because if I don't know what I'm doing there, I'm going to feel out of place. For people with extroverted tendencies, this is likely to fill you with a little bit more energy, right? You see this and you go, wow, I can see all these people. I can meet new people. I can engage with them. I could feel, some sort of companionship with these people as I'm learning about them, right? So there's energy that comes from just seeing this. Whereas from people with introverted tendencies, it sort of sucks that energy away from you right from the get-go. And so that's something to acknowledge. It's not a bad thing. It's just a reality in terms of how people experience the world around us. In the sort of the pandemic era where we went virtual, I think there was a lot of benefit to these one-on-one conversations and one-on-one meetings that we had from our own spaces, where we had the fortune to be in our own spaces, to engage with people on Zoom or other sessions, especially when these were one-on-one experiences. And one of the platforms that Career Services brought on board for this to promote networking was this platform called Meetaway, where you could have these networking engagements one-on-one. You'd sign up, a group of 30 people would sign up, and then the system would partner you with one person at a time, and then you'd meet a series of people through this process. It was actually something that was fairly manageable in terms of what it made me feel from a networking perspective. I was doing one of these recently, though, and because there was sort of an odd number of people and everyone else was in the conversation and I wasn't, at some point I got thrown out of the conversations and I got taken to this calm image here. This is just a holding place for the Meetaway platform that said, no one's chatting with you right now. Go grab a coffee, get your questions in order. The challenge was, as soon as I got here, there was no going back to those conversations, right? It took a lot of energy to have those conversations, and they took me to this calm spot, and that's where I stayed for the rest of the networking session, and then I ended, because it really was energy refreshing to be here, not talking to anyone, after sort of having to generate that energy of that engagement. So that's it's a true feeling to experience. If I were to plot my own happiness versus the number of people around me, this tends to be what it looks like, right? So I'm happy when there are fewer people. I'm less happy when there are lots of people. Now, when I get on the trolley in the morning, if I'm the only person who gets on the trolley at one of the stops, it's a perfect day for me, right? There's the driver and there's me and an entire trolley. It's perfect. And then everyone who gets on that trolley makes my day just a slightly less better from my perspective, because now they're in my space. And I learned about this term called the social battery over the sort of pandemic. It sort of rose to the forefront. The social battery being, introverts in their home environment get charged up by being alone in their own space, in their own head. You start the day with 100% battery, and then in the rest of the day, you've disconnected from your power source, and you're using your social battery as you engage with people throughout that day. And by the end of the day, especially if you've had to engage with lots of people, lots of different people, large amounts of people, that battery becomes drained and you need to be able to recharge. You need to remove yourself from that space. So the social battery is a fairly good analogy for what's going on. As I think about then, this the numbers that might make sense for my chart here, they are pretty, it's a pretty steep decline with a small number of people around me. And I actually found, when I was looking for images for the social battery, this picture, which pretty much maps exactly what my numbers were in my own graph, right? 2 people, I'm perfectly fine. 5 people, 6 people, my battery is drained. So it was very interesting that obviously it's a shared experience across people who do have introverted tendencies in this way. You can even get a t-shirt. Maybe that helps people understand what you're going through as you're experiencing these networking conditions. So let's then discuss sort of what introverted tendencies and extroverted tendencies tend to look like. I shared the article early on in the chat. You can take a look at that sort of identifies some of the characteristics. But in general terms, introverted and extroverted tendencies talk about where you get your energy from, right? Introverts tend to get the energy internally, self-generated from being in their own space, in their own heads. That's what makes you feel empowered, is to be able to have sort of independence and a sort of not isolation, but being in your own space and controlling that space. Because people with introverted tendencies tend to spend a lot of time in their heads. They're very thoughtful, they're very strategic, they like to communicate effectively, but only once they've thought things through and know what it is they want to say and have observed the settings around them to know what's going to be the most impactful statements that you can make in that scenario. Introverts are actually very good communicators in many cases. They communicate effectively and efficiently, but oftentimes they don't enjoy small talk, that it's not necessarily strategic talk, right? Let's get to the point and talk about the thing that we're here, and so that we're able to have those conversations. Let me throw the links into the chat. Someone just requested that while we're here. So you'll see a document within this box folder that has all of the links in it. So you should be able to download those and go through all these different links that I'm sharing. So people who have introverted tendencies are really able to network effectively. They just have to be in a controlled space to be able to do that. In general terms, an extrovert is someone who gains energy from those around them, right? So when they're isolated on their own, they don't find it as motivating to do the work. They have to get motivated to be doing independent work, but they get motivated. They become motivated when they're around other people. Oftentimes, I think people with introverted tendencies see extroverts, and they go, it's so easy. It's so easy for them to engage in the world around us. They have these casual conversations. They make it look so easy. And sure, there's a sort of a positive energy for them when they do that. But when it comes to networking, that's not always an advantage, because just having lots of conversations with people doesn't mean that you're actually achieving your networking goals. It doesn't mean that from those conversations, you're gaining information or gaining useful information to answer your questions. And so it's not a competition, right? Introverts or extroverts, there's no better. It's just we see the world differently, we experience the world differently. But in any environment that you see people having conversations, it doesn't mean that they are as effective as the conversations that you can have. And then the other thing that's worth bearing in mind, that picture of networking that I showed where everyone looked like they were happy and laughing, whatever it is, in that room, there are already introverts, right? So it's not as if every crowd of people that you see are other people who are extroverted. The world is made up of a nice mix of those people. So based on those descriptions, then, we're going to go through and we're going to make sure that as we talk about networking as a strategy, we're sort of relying on those positive, strategic, thoughtful approaches that introverts bring to the equation as part of their networking. So then why do you want to network? Or maybe I should rephrase this. Why should you network? Because obviously you don't necessarily want to, but you know that you have to, and people tell you that all the time. So let's think about some of the benefits of networking. Again, in some of yesterday's sessions, we covered some of these, and we'll just go through them again just to refresh our mind for those of you who weren't at the sessions yesterday. It's a great opportunity, obviously, to discover paths, career paths, and opportunities that are out there that you haven't yet had an experience to know about. You haven't done them, you haven't had an internship with them, you haven't heard of them before. This is a great way of doing that. It's a great way to gain actual tangible knowledge of the things that you need to be effective on the role, the skills, the knowledge, but also the steps that you need to take to be a good candidate, right? How do you apply for this type of role isn't something that you're going to have inherent knowledge about without sort of being able to sort of reach out to people and ask those questions. It helps you figure out the culture of the organizations that you might be going to. Obviously, what you want to be able to do is to find an organization that values the introverted tendencies that you bring and doesn't put you in a position where you're always losing energy during the day because you're in a role that sort of does not align with how your energy is generated, right? So those types of questions, when you reach out to people and ask them about their day and what engagement they have with other people and what that looks like, it's a really great networking type of question to ask. Networking on the other side, so one side is information gathering, which is going to support your career development. On the other side, it's great for you to be able to practice your personal branding, right? So introverts tend not to necessarily directly showcase and market themselves as effectively as they could. And so these types of conversations that you can have with people are good practice for putting and trying out new language to describe yourself and your skills and your experience and the value that you're going to bring to an organization. It's also a great opportunity to help others, right? By networking, reaching out to people, you are able to share information that you have, resources that you have. And if one thing that the introverts love to do when they are in these environments is to be useful, right? Is to be strategic, not just to have conversations because they're conversations, but have conversations that are helpful, that are meaningful, that have tangible outcomes. So being able to help others is another key part of that aspect. What is networking? Well, there's many ways to define it, but at the end of the day, it is really just talking with a goal in mind, right? So it is not just talking, it's really strategic talking, if there's such a thing as strategic talking. And the things that you can think about as your networking strategy is, what is it that I'm trying to gain by networking? What don't I know? What do I need to know? What are my questions? And who has answers to those questions? So what makes networking different from just running into someone and talking to them on the bus is that you know going into a networking engagement that you have certain questions in mind And ideally that the person that you're talking to is the right person for you to talk to, not just a random person. Now, random people can sometimes be helpful, right? The person you sit next to on an airplane might have information that you know that you need or that you're looking for, and that sort of happenstance, that luck is the way that the world works. But you don't have to rely on that. You can rely on strategic networking that puts you in the right place with the right people at the right time. It's also important to realize that it's okay to tell people that you do need help. I'm trying to find this out. I can't find this. I don't know this. And I think a lot of times introverts tend to want to find the answers to themselves and tend to look at published information that's out there or information that they can then gain access to try to answer all these questions themselves. But in terms of networking, people are often happy to help. They're happy to lend their advice and their thoughts, but they don't know that you need help if you can't communicate that, right? So part of networking is to be able to communicate what it is that you need from people so that they can help you. Because if they don't know what you need, and if you don't know what they need, then obviously there's going to be sort of little help there for you. So let's think about the process of networking, what that looks like, right? So I think sometimes people think about networking as a way to get a job, and something that's a component to it. What I would tend to focus on is networking as a way of gathering information, because that's a more strategic approach, and it's sort of a more step-by-step approach to what that looks like, right? So by gathering information through networking, you're going to be better positioned to actually get a job through networking. And let's sort of think about what that looks like. So the gathering information is like a series of stepping stones from where you are right now to the job that you are hoping to get, right? So the exploration is out there, the information gathering as part of networking is going to help you achieve that goal. Every bit of information that you have and are able to gain, every connection and contact that you make is going to get you closer to that goal, right? It's going to be those small steps where you're slowly gaining information about those roles are going to be so helpful. Now, what does that mean in terms of a stepping stone approach? Well, it means that, first of all, you should rely, if you have introverted tendencies, on one of the best skills that you have, which is doing your own research into these organizations, research into the career fields. Anything that doesn't involve actually talking to people is really something that introverts do well. And so that background research is fundamental. Understanding those questions that you do have based on what you've read is also fundamental. So it's a gap analysis, right? Here's what I've read, but here's what I still don't understand. Here's what I don't know still. And those become the questions for your networking. Then finding the people who actually have answers to those questions. Again, that's a strategic planning process. It's not just the first person you meet. It's not even just the easiest person that you meet, but looking to see if someone has an experience or a background that's going to be able to answer those questions is critical. And then finding people that you have in common with other people. The connections that your connections have right now are a really great way forward, because again, you can leverage people that you know, and introverts do tend to have a small group of trusted connections. If they can help you connect to someone else, that's going to be a key part of your strategy moving forward. And then asking questions, right? And again, that's another way that people with introverted tendencies tend to be great in these scenarios, is that they ask questions that are impactful because they're well thought through questions. They're not just general questions, they're questions that are meaningful to you. So this strategy, this approach is what's going to make you successful in a networking situation. If we think about the other approach, right? If we just think about networking as, well, I want to use networking to get me a job, then it's more challenging because it requires people to do things for you that they can't actually help you with, right? So if I just want to network only to get a job, then that requires me to have people tell me what's a good fit for me, what jobs are open and that I would be good for. It requires someone to pass on my application to someone else, even if they don't really know me that well. And it requires me to have people advocate, or requires other people to be able to advocate for me, again, even though they may not understand what it is that I bring and what that looks like. So these are sort of if you try to short circuit the networking process, these are the things that you would be trying to do if you were to get a job. But none of these people who are contacts that you'll be connecting with can actually help you very much, because they just don't know you well enough, right? They don't know what's a good job for you. They don't want to advocate for you because they have no reason to. And you know, they aren't necessarily going to pass on your materials to someone else because their reputation is on the line as well. So that would be like trying to get from where you are now to the job that you're trying to apply to by taking a giant leap over a lake on a rope, which isn't going to work very well. So stepping stone approach is always going to be very effective. And those conversations that you're having with people, they're going to be critical to you for many reasons. One is that they're going to give you the language that you need to position yourself for a role. They're going to allow you to create different narratives about yourself that you may not have used thus far. They are going to allow you to build relationships with people, close, professional relationships. And the more someone knows about you and your passion, your motivation, and your skills, the more they're well positioned to advocate for you to their peers, to their hiring manager, to other people in their organization, to other contacts that they have. So that slow relationship building is so critical. And that relationship building does not happen in large group settings. That happens on one-on-one interactions and leveraging those sort of more focused networking interactions. It also allows you to refine your narratives, define and refine your narratives so that you have better language to use to describe what is valuable about you for the different industries that you might be interested in. So fundamentally, networking is so valuable for all these reasons, right? And so even though it sort of it feels like an energy drain, it is a wonderful thing to be able to invest your time in. I think we can all agree that this scenario there, the top left, is not what it needs to look like, right? There are so many other ways to start conversations with people that are going to be much more effective. And we're going to talk about different strategies now that might be a key part of that process. So here are my 9 introvert-approved networking tips. It would have been 10, but 10 doesn't start with the letter N, so I thought 9 would be better. 9 networking tips for introverts. And resources that we have at Career Services and beyond Career Services that might be helpful for you. So fundamentally, the best approach to networking, and these tips are perfectly applicable to people with extroverted tendencies too, so have no fear. The fundamental approach to networking is to do the background research first. I think, as I said before, one of the challenges that I often face in a work environment is I may have a question for someone who I know has an answer to that question. And as I stand up to go to their office and ask them, I say to myself, well, wait a minute, can't I just find it out for myself? And then I go online and I find the answer to myself, right? So at the end of the day, I still have the same answer. I just haven't gone through a person who I know could have given me that answer. I don't think there's a right or wrong there, but I think when it comes to networking, you're not just going to be able to do it by yourself, right? There's information that you can find online. These are the Vault guides, which are going to be transformed into the first-hand guides, because Vault's renaming itself to first-hand. And there are so many of these industry guides that can give you a solid foundation to the types of careers that you may be interested in. And they give you great insider information, the types of trajectories, the roles, the payment approaches, the tasks and skills that are valuable. All of these things you can sort of suck up and read and have that information. I think that's wonderful, right? I think it's a really great way to start off the process, but you can't just stop with the reading, right? You do need to progress to the next step. Even resources like Glassdoor. So again, Glassdoor is an external website. You can sign up, set up an account, you give some information about your own career experience, and then you can get access to a lot of these resources through there. On Glassdoor, you can see that for every company that's out there, they have reviews of that company by people who work there and the jobs that they have and the salaries. It's a great salary tool, what you might expect in an interview. Again, so many bits of information there that allow you to gain an insider perspective of an organization that's going to help you. It's not the end of the conversation, but it's a really great foundation to build your networking on. Even on Handshake, we talked about this yesterday as well. If you go to the Employers tab, log into Handshake and goes to the Employers tab, you can go to most of the employers and you'll find that they have similar reviews and interviews and jobs, just those same categories that Glassdoor had. So you can learn about an organization from the perspective of a student. Now, many of these reviews tend to be more undergraduate written and focused because the Handshake is not primarily, but it tends to skew towards that population. You will find graduate student perspectives and thoughts on this as well. Again, it's great information, it's free information, it doesn't involve having to talk to anyone in real time. It's fundamental to your process. The challenge is that all of this online research is great, but you can't actually go to Google and say, do I want to work at Facebook? Is this a job that I want? Right? So you can take in all these data points, but at some point you're going to need more perspectives about whether this path or whether this role or whether this organization is a good fit for you. Because Google cannot answer that. It might try to autofill and give you a go, but your questions, your unique background, your unique career goals and aspirations are unique to you, right? And no one is going to be able to speak to that in these reviews. But by engaging with people and connecting with people who have similar experiences or who see the world in similar ways, you will be able to begin to answer some of the questions that help you answer this type of question. Is this an organization that I want to work in? Will I flourish in this organization, right? No one can answer that question for you, but if you find someone who sees the world like you and you say to them, how are you flourishing in this organization? What does that look like for you? What's a good day look like? What's a bad day look like? And you sort of live through their experiences. That is going to be so valuable as you then say, well, can I imagine myself in that role? Can I see my skills being used in a good way? Will I see myself being comfortable doing those types of things, right? So many ways to sort of get to your questions that are specific to you. This is why, the one-on-one advising that we suggest that people take up, with us at Career Services is helpful, because everyone here has their own unique backgrounds and unique goals. One-on-one advising is just a way to reflect on those for you as an individual, and help you sort of see through and understand what is going to be a good next step for you, right? So that's what that networking is sort of doing as you think about that. Step number 2, it doesn't matter how you start, but you kind of need to make it part of your day, right? Part of your professional development role. There was an author of a career book for STEM students who came up with the 80-10-10 rule for professional development. 80% of your active work time should be spent doing the best work that you can do, right? So if you're a researcher, 80% of your active time should be, of your research time is really spent doing that research and really investing in that. 10% of that time should be professional development. That's professional development is learning about opportunities, learning about skills, gaining new skills, but also connecting with people to do that. So networking falls into that 10%. And then the other 10% is telling everyone what a good job you're doing with your research, right? So communicating outwardly the benefit that you bring. So that 10% of your active time, which is sort of your daytime, your work hours, as it were, not the time you should be sleeping or engaging with other people or connecting or just being in your own and having downtime, that 10% should be, sort of built into your weekly, monthly schedule. And that's really what you want to be doing with your network. You always want to find an opportunity to sort of be engaged with it. So you don't have to wait for a big event to network, right? It just becomes more of the fabric of what you do. I mentioned Aurora yesterday. Aurora is a platform that developed for PhD students, but it's perfectly suitable for anyone to take a look at who is interested in some of the career development resources that they have. But they do have this career exploration library where they've basically done a series of informational interviews with PhDs in different roles. And as I said yesterday, one of the benefits of this is it doesn't break it down by job title, because job titles can sometimes be sort of unhelpful. They break it down by values and interests. So if you're interested in innovation or flexibility or any aspect of these things that they're mentioning here, you're going to find that those are, you can watch those videos that align with these different careers that these PhDs have. So this is networking without you actually having to talk. You're just a fly on the wall as other people are networking. Okay, just as a reminder, because the question did come in, you are going to find the recorded videos of these sessions on the YouTube channel, the Career Services YouTube channel. If you go to the links page that I will post again here, you'll see a link to the Penn Career Services YouTube page. They just need to be edited before they get up there, but if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you should get a notification when those are up, and take a look at those. Also, if people have questions, I am monitoring the chat, so it's right here, so feel free to drop those in as we're going through. I'm sort of go through at top speed here so we can cover all the information. But you can certainly drop in a question as we go through, and I'm happy to answer that for you. So Aurora is a great resource to be able to use then to be able to take advantage of these informational interviews. What I would encourage you to do is not just watch them and go, oh, that's a great, I'm glad I'm not there, or that seems interesting, but do some critical evaluation of what you've just seen, right? So think about what questions the interviewer asked, and ask yourself, would I ask those questions? Would I ask different questions? Which ones are you going to take from those interviews and make sure that you are asking for the people that you're engaging with, right? Hearing someone ask those questions makes it easier to ask those questions for yourself. Think about how to start the conversation, how to end the conversation, because that's oftentimes the most awkward thing. How do they do that in the interview? Now, those are going to be edited interviews, so it's going to be slightly artificial, but again, you're just trying to get a sense of what that looks and feels like. Think about the questions that are more important to you. As a general interview, you're not going to get, those questions aren't necessarily going to answer all your questions. So in addition to the ones that you liked, what would you add to those questions? That's going to make you feel pretty confident in terms of what you want to ask the next time that you do that. And then most importantly, think about what are the takeaways, because at the heart of it, networking interactions like this need to give you information that you can use and act on, right? If it's just a conversation and you learn general information that's not applicable, then it can sometimes feel very unsatisfying or unsatisfactory. So think about those takeaways and think about whether the questions got you those takeaways or if there are more questions that are out there. And then the follow-up is sort of the next step, right? How do you keep that conversation going? We're not really going to touch on that today, but think about how you might, after having a conversation with that person, find overlap between you and them and what they said, and what you would do to reach out to them as a thank you note, right? Thank you so much for chatting with me. It was so great to hear about X. think about what that would look and sound like, because that's a great way of keeping the conversation going. I'm going to get to your question in a second in the chat, but let's cover this one first. So don't start networking until you have questions that you need, right? And I think that's one of the main tripping up points that people experience, is that they know that they should do it, and they go to events, they go to situations where there's networking happening. But if you don't have a plan, it's even more energy draining than it would be otherwise, because you just don't know what you're doing there, and you can't utilize your strategic thinking to get at what you need. The other aspect of it is that if you come with a plan and you come with questions, once you have some answers to those questions, you get to go. You get to leave and stop the interaction. Like if there was a networking event for an hour and you answered your questions in the first 15 minutes, I would celebrate that by really making sure that you are leaving that space and going back to your own space to recharge, right? Don't force yourself to have engagements once you've achieved some of your goals. Achieving one goal and feeling positively reinforced for doing that is much better than sort of having to stick around there because you think it's important to do so. It's the same with things like career fairs. If you go to a career fair and there's one employer that you want to speak with that employer and then leave, right? Don't be made to feel sort of downhearted that there are other employers out there that other people are still chatting with people, because you may not need those conversations or want those conversations. And then, always remember that some of the people in the room are going to be introverts too, right? They are going to appreciate someone who's very to the point and very concise and has a key plan. It's going to make them happy to have those conversations because they like to do that. So not everyone that you meet is going to want to have long, rambling conversations about everything. Some people are just happy to be very transactional about that. Let me jump into some of these questions here. So how does one deal with social anxiety during professional networking? So the social anxiety aspect, I think, is an important component to it, right? I think there's a more intense aspect of what I'm talking about being introverts versus the sort of the anxiety of it. And I think some of the anxiety aspects comes from sometimes just, again, being in a situation where you don't have a plan to get out of the situation, right? I think if you can be very strategic and say, there's one conversation I need to have today and then I'm done, it's much better than sort of, trying to convince yourself that this entire event is something that you need to be in. So I can't really speak to sort of the anxiety aspect, because I think that looks very unique to everybody and there's different causal factors behind that. But what I would sort of double down on is this idea that if you have a plan in place and know how to start the interactions and how to end and then how to leave gracefully and feel good about that, then sometimes that can be helpful. I think the other aspect obviously is, well, two other aspects I would add to that. Practice, which is hard because it continues that anxiety and sort of makes it feel chronic, but doing it more frequently, but having a positive experience from those interactions, because you're not sort of forcing yourself to do it in a way that doesn't align with your energies, right? So continually sort of practicing the different components of it, that's going to be helpful. And then, the advice that you see online of having a buddy or having someone who can go through this process with you, or just reflect on that with you. And we certainly can reflect on your networking at Career Services, but having one of your peers sort of just sit down afterwards and say, how did that feel? What did that look like? Can be so helpful, because it just sort of helps you get it out of your head and get it into sort of the environment around you. So that would be some of the suggestions for that. The Aurora videos are going to be one of the links that I shared in this box folder here. We'll have the link to the Aurora videos, so you can see those and find those videos there. And then how do you stick to your authentic self while strategic planning or conversations? I think this is really important, because certainly there's an element of having to generate an energy about interactions with people. Oftentimes you'll find that some people with introverted tendencies will be a very dynamic version of themselves in some settings, and then a very sort of reflective and quieter version in other settings. They're actually both you, right? If that's how you experience the world, they are versions of yourself. You're not being inauthentic or unauthentic. They're just sort of contextual responses that you have to the environment. So being authentic, I think it means being able to share what's important about you to someone else, right? I mentioned that networking is about gaining information from someone, but it's also you sharing your narrative there. And I think being very clear and very direct about why you're excited or why you're interested at any rate in terms of having a conversation with people, because what that means to you is going to help that person know how they can help you and help them appreciate that. And sometimes being authentic means, I have a hard time, being in these types of events. I feel it takes a lot of energy for me to engage with that, but I so appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. Even that can be a great way of starting a conversation so that you're not, overthinking and over-focusing on those topic areas. So again, I don't know if that sort of answers all your questions precisely, the ones that came in, but I think the idea of being authentic to yourself is very important. I think that means being in situations that you really are motivated by or not, don't find increasingly energy draining. But it also means, sticking with your own narrative and creating that narrative that's going to be effective. How much time should one spend strategizing a conversation beforehand, approximately? It's a good question. I'm the kind of person who, just before I have to pick up a phone to call someone, I've run through 3 versions of the conversation that I'd like to have in my head, only to figure out that the person on the other end hasn't got my script and doesn't follow those conversations. So I would say that before you go to an event or before you have in a situation where you're having a conversation, you should check their background, you should check their LinkedIn profile, you should think about the questions that you have, you should think about what versions of those questions that they can answer. And so, that can take a good period of time to reflect on those things. I don't think there's a minute number that sort of works there, but you have to know why that person can help you, and you have to be able to communicate that to them. And so once you're at the point where you can do that, I think you're in a good situation. If you go onto LinkedIn, this is terrifying, right? So all these people with smiley faces staring at you, there's like millions of them right now on LinkedIn. If you go without a plan, it's going to be overwhelming from the get-go. However, if you think about, how to make that more manageable, it's finding one person at a time, right? There's 185,000 Penn alumni out there, but you don't want to have to scroll through all of those. You need to find the 20 or so people who have the most overlap with you in terms of their interests, their roles, their connections, whatever that is. Once you get down to 20, there may only be 3 of them that you find that you're a good fit to chat with in terms of what they can tell you. That's the way to sort of make this a manageable process, right? So Danielle here is one of my first 3 connections, but I have 18 shared connections. If I wanted to start a conversation with Danielle and I wasn't a first degree connection, then I could go through each of those 18 people to be able to help me do that effectively. So the true sort of goal in terms of networking is to really be maximizing these one-on-one engagements with people. At Career Services, we talk about this as informational interviews, right? Having conversations with people who are in roles that you don't have or you've never had, to learn more about how they got there and what those roles look like. Not because you are committing to that role, but because you're exploring it and because you're exploring their experience doing that as well, right? And so this is an informational interviewing guide. It's one of the links that I shared in the chat. You'll be able to download this on our website. It just walks you through the easy process and gives you some of the questions that you can ask about that, right? So these are some general questions that you can ask about people's career and a particular organization that they're in. They give you insight. And again, if you find someone who you get a sense of, or who defines themselves as someone who has introverted tendencies, then asking them about their experience doing that role is going to give you really fundamentally good information that you can apply as part of your own exploration and your own job search moving forward. So these are questions within the guide. Because people with introverted tendencies like to be strategic, these are types of questions that you might ask as you are thinking about how to put together an effective resume if you are applying for a role, right? These are more targeted questions that say, with this information that I can get from someone, I can then put that into action in my resume and create a narrative about myself, especially what are the skills that are most valuable in this role? What are some of the situations where you get to use these skills? Knowing that information from people allows you then to say, well, how can I talk about those skills in my resume? And how can I illustrate similar situations when I'm talking about those skills? So at the heart of it, making sure that there's always a goal for your networking, I think, is fundamentally important. It's going to help you really feel like you're making the most of those interactions and that they're useful. And the more useful interactions you have, the more likely that you'll do that in the future. Low-hanging fruit, right? So people with introverted tendencies tend to have a small group of close relationships with people. Starting there, who do they know? What can they tell you? What connections can they build with you? Obviously, a great place to go. I talked about the Handshake community yesterday. I feel like students around you, in your group, in your lab, in your school, are a really great source of networking in a low-stress environment because you're all coming at it from the same perspective. You all have that shared experience as a student. Oftentimes, you may not know who else is in your program. If you're a PhD, there may be 4 years of PhDs ahead of you that you may not know or interact with. If you're a master's student, there may be even more people that you don't get to interact with on a regular basis. Handshake can help you begin to identify some of those people. So in order to find this community, go to your Handshake profile, click on your picture in the top right-hand corner, click on my profile. One of the boxes in the next page is going to be discover more students. You can click on the discover students like you across the Handshake network. That's going to take you to this broader explore students page. We used this yesterday to play around with some of the elements. You can look throughout the Handshake network. It's 500,000, no, not 500,000, 500 schools in the US and more who use Handshake. But you can narrow it down just to the University of Pennsylvania, which is going to be manageable. You can narrow it down by degree, by major, by lots of different things. So here I picked on master's students in the data science program who worked at Amazon. If that was an organization that I would like to work at, this is something that I might be able to connect with different people here to learn about their experience and leverage that as part of my networking, but also part of my career exploration, right? So if I were to pick one of these people here, Brian was an intern at Amazon doing a master's now. So Brian has information that I don't have about working at Amazon. And that's really, again, what networking is for. It's about gaining access to that information so that you can really leverage that as part of your own professional and career development. Networking with a buddy, in-person networking might actually be having someone go with you so that you can always talk with someone at some point, so that someone can help, your buddy can help you introduce you to people that they don't know, or that you don't know, that they know, just to have someone that's a sort of an anchor point, a point of stability in what can sometimes be a very, not stressful, but again, energy draining scenario. But there's another way to think about a buddy. A buddy is someone, as I mentioned earlier, someone that you can reflect with on your networking experiences, right? So having someone who's just going through the same processes, who's encountering the same types of obstacles, who is finding success and challenges, and to be able to talk through that is very helpful. I mentioned the fact that at career services, if you schedule an appointment with an advisor, you can talk about your networking, what's been going well, what hasn't, what strategies might work best for you. You can keep yourself on track by scheduling a follow-up appointment and just saying, here's what I've been doing and here's what I've learned from that. Sometimes that just allows you to download all that stuff from your head and take advantage of that. The other thing to think about is that there are sort of today networks, right? Today you are attending a session on networking for introverts, and so everyone here might share a connection with you in that way, and might be looking for someone to help them support their networking the same way that you're looking for you to support for someone to support your networking. So it just got me thinking, and I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but I set up a jam board here, and I put the link in the chat. If you wanted to sort of post a, I'm looking for someone to help with this, or I'm happy to be a buddy for someone with this, feel free to do that. I'll just leave this up there for a short period of time over the next week or so. Certainly it's just an opportunity if you wanted to. I don't know if anyone will be brave enough to do it, but I thought I would open up today's network for you to be able to access that if you wanted to. So you can just go ahead and click on the sticky note tab here that I've identified and put in any information that you like that might be helpful. So I throw that out there because every time you're in a scenario, you can create your own networks with the people around you. Every program, workshop, speaker panel that you go to, you are sharing something in common with the people around you that you might be able to leverage as part of your networking. And in terms of being what might be called an accountability buddy, make sure that you are helping people around you as well, right? If you are someone who's made successes or had successes in your networking, share that insight with other people, share what you've learned, share the strategies that work for you with other people, ask people about their strategies and what worked for them. These are best practices that you don't need to sort of reinvent every time. You want to really leverage other people's knowledge of that. Student groups are a fantastic opportunity, to join those and create a community with people around you. And sometimes you can create, subgroups within that of people who have shared interests or even very different interests, but are going through the same process of networking. So the accountability buddy model is, I think, can be very effective at helping people make the most of these environments. The next strategy is to make sure that you are getting the networking out of your head. I think if you're networking and you have lots of conversations that are hard anyway, and it's all in your head, it gets very confusing and overwhelming. And so we talked about having a sort of a spreadsheet yesterday and really finding a way to get the information that you're gathering down out of your head so you can see where it fits into the mosaic of information you're gathering, and you can see where those gaps are made, right? Where there are gaps and empty cells, that's a question, an opportunity, a next step that you can leverage so that you're always making progress. Eventually, as you fill out different tabs for different industries, this will become a rich source of information that you can leverage for your applications, for your interviews. All this information is valuable, but if it stays in your head, it becomes supremely overwhelming. We talked about career shift yesterday. We looked at doing company searches by industry. they also have a sort of a contact sort of management aspect to Career Shift. So again, this is a resource that I've shared in the links document. So if you go to Career Shift and you go to contacts, you can search contacts by first name, which would be weird because lots of Brians out there, but you probably don't want to meet every Brian. All I did here was to do a job title search by climate, right? So I'm not doing an industry search. I'm not doing a first name search. I'm doing a job search by climate. That gets me 3,000 contacts, far too overwhelming, but you can see the word climate is all in there in their job titles here. So I narrowed it down by Pennsylvania, and I added the word sustainability into the job title just to narrow it down. And that got me 4 contacts here: climate change and sustainability, consultant, climate sustainability manager. Not all of these will be related to climate if that's what I was interested in. Sometimes school districts use the word climate for non-climate related reasons that I would understand it. But this set of 4 people could be a networking next step for you. What you can do on Career Shift under one of these bulk actions is that you can download these contacts into a folder. And I downloaded it into climate roles folder. And then you can save that folder and you can come back to that folder and you can see this list of contacts and you can say to yourself, well, have I reached out? Have I learned anything from these? And so if I have, Brad here is one of my contacts, I can actually go to Brad's profile page on Career Shift, my Career Shift profile. You'll have your own profile, and I can add notes in from the conversation that I had, or even questions that I might want to ask Brad when I do set up something there. So this is a great way of keeping track of some of those interactions that you're having. So it's out of your head and sort of down on paper or in your spreadsheets to take advantage of that. Practice in low-stake environments, very helpful to do that, right? So we do have these virtual career fairs this semester, and we're not quite sure what next semester is going to look like, but the benefit of a virtual career fair is you don't have to go into a room with 300 people that are all talking. You can schedule one-on-one sessions with employer representatives. You know who you're talking to, you know when it is because it's scheduled, you know how long it is because it's 10 minutes, you know about the company and their opportunities, so you can ask good questions. It's very structured, a great way to practice your narrative. Even if you're not looking for a job right now, you can ask great questions to learn about things. So the virtual government and nonprofit fair might be a great way of playing around with that. I think it's a consortium event, so it's not just run through Penn. There's some great employers there if you're interested in that. Another resource that we have on our website is called Lunch Club, and this is sort of a networking startup that started fairly recently. But this is a sort of a matching platform where you go into the Lunch Club platform. It's free to use. You put in your interests and what you're interested in learning about, and the AI system that they have matches you with a professional that has a similar interest to you. So you can't go in and choose someone. So I went into my profile and I just did under the people, I did a climate change search. And you can see here, there are 3 people here. You don't necessarily get to say, I want to speak with Kim or Colin or Amanda, but you can say, these are the types of people that I want to reach out to. And then what happens every week, Lunch Club says, would you like to schedule a session this week? And you say, yes, I'm free on Thursday at 4 o'clock. And then on Tuesday or Wednesday, you'll get an email saying, we've matched you with a person. And you won't know who that person is until you get the email. Then you'll look online, you'll find out how you're connected with them. And then you have this scheduled 45-minute conversation, which is not directional, right? It's not about getting you a job. It's about practicing your narrative. It's about learning about them. It's about practicing talking about yourself. There's no risk involved because they're not hiring you. You're not being interviewed. They're just interested in interesting people. And so even though there's some, could be some hesitancy about it, it's actually very refreshing and very fun to do because there is no pressure to be a certain person, right? These are people who are not connected potentially to industries, directly connected to industries that you may be interested in, but who you can learn from still, and who may be able to connect you with people that they know because they learn about you. So I do encourage everyone to give Lunch Club a try. If you don't like it, so you don't have to use it again, but it's a really great non-stressful tool to do that. And part of the reason it's non-stressful is because you don't have to worry about scheduling a time or meeting in a place. You pick a time that works for you, and then you'll be matched with someone who shares something in common. And part of the fun is figuring out what it is that you share in common with them. Passive networking is also very important. Passive networking is the things that you do that aren't necessarily directly having conversations with people. So there's a great post on the Carpe Careers blog, which is a blog that I oversee on the Inside Higher Ed website, which is specifically written for PhD students and postdocs. You can take a look at this article. I shared the link in the links thing that I'll share in a second again. But passive networking might be something like this, right? So this is a post I found on LinkedIn. Let's break it open. So Mariella posted something about a program, and then Michelle jumped in because she's part of that program. And then further down that coast, Marissa jumped in and said, I want to attend, and then Michelle go back to Marissa and say, great. Now, they're all people whose names begin with M, which I find is weird, but there you go. But the idea here is that Marissa has been sort of passively networking because they have now made a sort of potential connection with Michelle, right? They've drawn themselves, they've identified themselves, their pictures there, their roles there, and they've made that connection. And all that was commenting. Sometimes it's just sharing, sometimes even just liking, right? So in this session here, Brittany likes this, and it's very visible on LinkedIn that Brittany liked this post. And I could like it, and I could say, great. I could click on the autofill if I wanted to, which I don't like to do because it's not very strategic. But this is passive networking. If you can do a little bit of this throughout your time as a graduate student and postdoc, you are going to gain connections, you are going to gain information, you're going to gain more, people are going to be able to see you more, right? More visibility. And our final networking strategy is the fact that in-person interactions are inevitable, right? We are going to get back to a situation where there will be larger groups of people. And so here are just some of my takeaway bits of advice for that. Make sure that you have a confident greeting for people and rehearse it, just because it's great to start a conversation without having to think about it. Hi, I don't think I've met you yet. I'm Joseph, right? And oftentimes I say that to people and they're like, wait, we just spoke 2 minutes ago, because I don't tend to recognize people's faces very well. One of the sessions in this week's workshops week is going to be how to answer the tell me about yourself question. That's kind of what you're doing as a part of a networking introduction. So if you want to attend that one, you'll get some great insights to that. The other great practice, best practice, is to be part of the organizing group, right? Help organize events so that you have a role in a networking event that isn't just turning up. You'll find that you enjoy it more, but you'll have just the same number of conversations that you would have done if you just attended, but you'll feel much more confident about them, right? So you're not going to lose out by being on the organizing committee. You're actually going to gain, because you'll gain a lot of confidence about that. And again, I think from a social anxiety perspective, this is a great resource to have, because, or a great approach to take, because it's going to be something that gives you a task as part of that role. And then make sure that when you are in a session, in person or even virtual, when you ask a question, remember to introduce yourself to everyone. Don't just ask a question. Say, hi, I'm Joseph. I'm a PhD student here at Penn. I'd love to learn more about this. By doing that, you introduce yourself to 10, 30, 40 people at a time, and then people can connect with you much more easily because they know what it is that you bring. So it's a really great best practice to do that. Also to follow up with speakers who answered your question or who've attended an event through a thank you email or attended a career fair. That's great networking.